Good morning, everyone. My name is Kurt Fairless. I'm the Vice President of Core Operations here at ATI. I'd like to thank you for joining us this morning for our webinar of rising material and labor costs, their impact, and how to manage them. We've assembled a group of panelists that are going to share their expertise on the subject matter. Before I introduce them, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping items. Due to the number of participants, you have all been muted. We will host a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please submit any written questions that may come to mind during the discussion using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom window. Now, I'd like to introduce our three panelists. Joining us today is Greg Pine, Vice President of Pricing Solutions at Exactware, John Shaw, Senior Vice President at Marsh Risk and Insurance Services, and Pat Harper, Director of Procurement and Compliance here at ATI. Greg Pine is going to kick us off today to discuss material and labor cost trends. Greg oversees the departments responsible for the maintenance and publication of pricing information for more than 460 markets across North America for structural repair, structural cleaning, mitigation, contents and preservation, and maintenance. He's completed more than 10 industry certifications from OSHA, the RIA, and the IICRC. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Kurt. And I'm glad to be here today and excited to have this time to go through and show some of the trends we've seen in material and labor costs over the last little while, last year or so. So let's go ahead and move to the first slide. One of the big stories of recently in the last year and a half has been lumber pricing and what lumber pricing has been doing over time. Starting around the July, August timeframe of last year, we started to see increases in lumber pricing, and they started to move at a very fast pace, and they've continued throughout this time. This chart here separates out lumber and tracks them separately. Sheathing items like panels, wafer board and plywood, things like that. Then without sheathing, so dimensional lumber, treated lumber, the non-sheathing products that are in the rough lumber category. The light blue is the sheathing only, and the dark blue is without sheathing. You can see that the sheathing has increased at a faster pace than the non-sheathing. Again, starting in that July, August timeframe, we started to see an increase. If you go and compare July of last year, July of this year, we've seen over a 250% increase on common sheathing items for the material pricing, and over 100% increase in non-sheathing items. So prices have just moved drastically. To give you an idea of how drastic it's been in this process, if you look at 7/16 OSB, half-inch OSB wafer board, in that same time frame, it went around at a national average around just over $11 a sheet, up into the $65 to $75 a sheet average. So it's just increased drastically. And I've been working in this arena at Exactware publishing pricing for over 25 years now, and we've never seen lumber move this drastic in such a short period of time. Some of the reasons why to look at, obviously COVID had an impact. COVID came about, a lot of these lumber mills were running at full capacity, barely keeping up with supply. They had to figure out how to work in the COVID environment. They maybe furloughed some people. They guessed that maybe demand would go down due to COVID, so they anticipated not having to produce as much because of that. And it did go down for a very short period, but then it started to skyrocket. And some of the reasons it started to skyrocket that demand surge are things like new construction continued to boom. There's cheap money right now, for new construction as well as doing remodeling projects. You can get the 30-year mortgage rates are at all-time low. Home equity lines are low. Homes were increasing in value, so they had access to home equity lines. Then the fact that people were at home, a lot of people were at home working, and they need to have that office, or they weren't going out on vacation and things like that. So they're doing that shed in the backyard, doing that deck. So do-it-yourself projects increased drastically as well. It's kind of the perfect storm where they guessed that demand would go down. Demand actually increased at a large rate, and they had trouble figuring out how to work in that environment with COVID. So they got behind, and the prices started to skyrocket. And since money stayed down, loans were still cheap, the demand was still there and continued to go up. Fortunately, just in the last month or two, July and into August, we started to see that level out, and the wholesale market has started to decrease quite rapidly. So we anticipate we'll start to see some relief from that, start to see some downward movement in the next little while, based on what we're seeing with the futures market. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. This next slide looks at some key material categories and how they've changed over the last year, July to July. Lumber, like we talked about, overall, if you combine sheathing and dimensional lumber, we've seen over 162% increase over the last year. Drywall material, this is not just gypsum board, but the nails, the screws, the mud, the tape, the corner bead. At the national level, we've seen over a 10% increase in that type of material. Interior trim, baseboard, crown molding, casing, that kind of thing. We've seen almost an 8% increase in that type of product. Painting material, this is all kinds of painting material, whether it's stain, latex paint, interior, exterior products. We've seen over a 7% increase in those type of products. Carpet material, just about a 4% increase in that time frame. And then all types of roofing material, we've seen a just under 4% increase as well. And we're seeing some of these other materials, lumber, like I mentioned, is starting to level off and even come down, but the other materials are still moving up and going that way. And we anticipate some of those will continue to move. We don't anticipate to see any kind of increase like we saw in lumber, where we're going to see, a double, triple, quadruple in some cases. We don't anticipate to see that kind of level of increase, but we do anticipate that we'll see an increase that's higher than what we've seen historically in these materials over previous years in the past. The next slide here takes and looks at a sample basket of goods of labor and material. So we've taken a sample of different types of construction material and the cost to install them, trying to cross all kinds of construction trades. If you look at a building it from the ground up, where you have foundations and footings, the concrete, the framing, the finish work, the painting, the roofing, exterior finishes, all that goes into this sample basket of goods. If you look at it over the last year, we've seen over a 20% increase in this basket of goods if you track it. A large part of that is due to lumber. Obviously, there is lumber in this basket of goods, when we've seen it increase over 160% in that time frame. So that's impacted as well. But as you saw in that previous slide, there's other things that we're seeing increases in as well. And this historically, we see this going up 2 to 6% depending on the year. But we've seen over a 20% increase over the last year in this basket of goods that we've tracked. Let's go to the next slide. This looks at drywall individually. And again, it's not just the gypsum board, it's different types of gypsum board. You got your water resistant, moisture resistant, your regular drywall, your 5/8, your 1/2 inch. And looks at that, also looks at different things that go into drywall, like the drywall tape, the mud, the corner bead, the nails and screws, etc. And look at that over time. And as we saw previously, it's gone up over 10% in the last year, but most of that's happened from April forward. So it's just been really recent where most of that started to happen. I think some of these manufacturers of building materials, looked at what's happened in the lumber industry and have seen that increase has happened, and supply or demands continued, and they know they've had increases in their costs and things. So they're starting to say, well, maybe we need to look at increasing as well and seeing what happens. And so I think that's come into play also, just that lumber industry and other markets looking at that and watching what's happened there. Let's go to the next slide. This one takes a very common product in the insurance repair industry, property repair industry. Roofing claims are a huge part of that. Generally, we find that they run between 25% to 35% of the total dollar spend coming through our system is roofing. And this takes the laminated shingles or the architectural shingles for both labor and material. It takes a sample set of those items used in that, the shingles themselves, the drip edge, etc., and tracks it over time. This is labor and material. You can see over the last year, we've seen over an 8% increase in that. A lot of that's happened kind of from this year in 2021. You look at January forward, most of that's happened since then. So the 2020, it kind of stayed relatively flat, but this year we started to see it go up at a faster pace than we saw previously in the last year. Let's go to the next one. This looks at paint material. And again, this is going to be all kinds of paint material. You know, it could be stain, it could be exterior, interior paint, different types of paint and stains that are being used across different industries or different trades. So you can see we've seen a pretty good increase here as well, just under 8%. And again, most of that's happened from this year, March forward. You kind of see it in December, it's a little bit of an increase. And then again in March, April, May, it kind of increased again as it continued to go up. The demand, just also the impact of COVID, you know, manufacturing plants dealing with that, supply chains as far as trucking the material where it needs to be, you know, they've all been impacted by COVID, and that's come into play. And we're starting to see that now even more as the year moves on. That, and as well as that the demand is not going down. New construction continues to boom, and it has a big impact on construction pricing. You know, if I'm a painting contractor and I've got plenty of jobs from new construction and they're wanting me to do work and they're paying me more to do that work because people are still buying the houses and paying more for it, that indirectly or directly impacts the restoration world, remodel world as well, because it's the same pool of contractors. The manufacturer is selling product that's used in all those different industries, whether it's remodel or restoration or new construction. So it has an impact just overall, this construction part of it, and just that supply and demand of that has a big play into it. Let's look at the next slide. This one looks at labor and specifically specialized mitigation labor. In the insurance repair industry, you have specialized mitigation labor, you know, cleaning technicians, floor cleaning technicians, remediation technicians, remediation supervisors. You can see that we've seen increases for the cleaning technician of over 7%, the floor cleaning technician almost 8%, remediation technician, you know, over 5%, and the supervisor over 6%. And historically, in these specialized mitigation trades, we tend to see, you know, even a 1% or relatively stagnant to maybe 3 or 4% on an uncommon year. And this last year, we've seen, you know, almost double that in some cases in that increase. And this is many things that impact this. The specialized mitigation labor, you know, this is a little more specialized in new construction. You don't have cleaning technicians or remediation technicians, but they're coordinated or they're correlated. There's impact there in the construction industry in general. A lot of the blue collar workers, you know, that were in construction trades, when COVID came through, they may have been furloughed. They got unemployment benefits. You know, there's a lot of pressure for all blue collar type of work. Wages are going up, so to come back, they wanted more money. So this impacted what companies had to charge. They'll do that work, so they pay their people more to get get the workers to do the work that's there. There's not a lot of people going into these trades. You know, that's an issue as well. But just very interesting to look at these labor trades and see what's going on. And it's very, very different than what we've seen historically. With that, Kurt, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Greg. That was very, very informative, and I appreciate you sharing. Our next panelist is John Shaw, Senior Vice President at Marsh. John is the Property and Catastrophe Claims Consulting Leader for Marsh in the Southwest. He has extensive property and liability claims handling experience and assists clients in the resolution of complex claims and coverage disputes. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Kurt. And of course, thanks everyone for attending our presentation today. My part of the program will cover the impacts to your business from increased material and labor costs, particularly as related to property insurance claims, that being the space that I work in the most. If we could, next slide. We're going to talk a little bit about being prepared to address cost increases for materials and labor, and addressing those with your insurers from the outset on any property insurance claim. It's important to be able to preface the discussion from the beginning with insurers that, one, you are aware that this is the environment that you're working in, and two, that you are prepared to work with them as far as the cost increases are concerned. They will have dealt with these increases over time for the last few years, and will be aware of, the challenges that you may be experiencing in a job where you are not as familiar with the circumstances that could be encountered as even insurers are. Insurers may choose to assist the process by hiring their own construction consultants or cost management consultants to monitor the jobs in order to help you. But it's important at the beginning for everyone to be aware that there is the potential for this issue to be part of your job. So it helps to research the average cost increases in your area. This can be as simple as a Google search. It can be more elaborate, checking business journals in your area, checking other sources, even newspapers, on what the cost increases have looked like, particularly to your geographic area. It helps to know the history, because insurers are looking at it and trying to forecast what the cost could be as part of their overall reserve that they have to put up on the claim. And there, the next point, document. It's incredibly important in just regular insurance claims, in regular times, we'll call them, to document your claims as best as possible. It's even more imperative in the pandemic world that we're living in right now, to document on a daily basis the nature of the project and additional costs that are being anticipated or incurred as part of those projects. On large commercial losses, we'd even recommend that you look at hiring your own construction cost consultant to assist with your presentation of the claim to insurers, because they are most likely on the insurer's side doing the same thing. Again, I know this is a through line throughout this portion of the presentation, but communicate with the insurers. Let them know that when cost increases are anticipated on a job, as soon as you know. Work with them to address the issues. It's important to have the insurers as your partner in the process, and open and honest and readily aware and available for all of the instances and different types of situations that are being encountered at the job site. Next slide, if we could, please. Be sure and include items that may be unique to your job. Green building issues, code changes, design or construction changes. Oftentimes in property insurance claims, there is an opportunity value that is realized in that, people say, hey, we've always wanted to change this manufacturing process. We've always wanted to change the layout of this building. We want to take the opportunity to do more than just the insurance claim involved. So we need to work with insurers as to how to get that appropriate contribution to the claim. Are there special or new requirements in your business segment? For example, in the last couple of years with the pandemic, we've seen in the hospitality, habitational, healthcare, and senior living sectors that workers are being required to be tested for COVID, some as often as daily. And you're looking at potential personal protective equipment for the workers that hadn't been anticipated, and on a job that has a substantial workforce, those kind of costs can become incrementally significant in a very short period of time. So you need to be looking at building those costs into the project. Alert the insurers as soon as cost increases are being noted. Have an open dialogue. It's essential that they know as soon as you know. Now, on larger commercial jobs, will the insurers often have a construction consultant on site that you can confer with as things are happening? Yes, please do so. Take the opportunity to do that. When insurers find out 30 days later on a job that you've experienced significant cost increases and not informed them, then that creates some friction in the dialogue that has to be addressed as part of the continuing project and eventually the claim settlement. It just doesn't bode well for, the relationship with your insurers. Now, there could be delays due to the availability of labor and COVID-caused labor shortages. We've seen that in the last few months with skilled workers in particular that may test positive. They can't complete an assigned project and the work gets delayed until alternate labor is available or until those workers are cleared to return to the site. I've seen commercial jobs in the recent past that, well, one in particular that was originally estimated at $6 million. And due to the issues with COVID and personal protective equipment and trying to stay on schedule as best as possible, job came in at $8 million. And the majority of that was the COVID testing and the personal protective equipment, and then labor shortages that had to be addressed and alternate labor that had to be identified and brought in. And of course, the inherent delay that was part of that. It's been a tough road over the last couple of years, and I'm sure that some of you out there have already experienced it, and hopefully we'll be able to help you not experience it as significantly with the pointers we're giving as part of this presentation. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, the bottom line of all of this is that, you're going to have to anticipate increased property insurance costs in this. In the last few years, the pandemic and climate change and associated factors are presenting an increase in property claims that insurers have little actuarial data to support. And, a lot of it is just they don't have the statistics to develop their rates. There are variations that they haven't seen in the past, the long tail that they have of the statistics and the recent volatility in the statistics have created some variations that they are struggling with. Well, for an example, let's use the winter storm in Texas from last February. Texas has an average of severe winter storms of about every 20 years. There was a storm 10 years ago, and then there was this last one in February. So now we have storms are 10 years apart. So the question becomes, is this the new average, or is this a one-time anomaly? And that uncertainty in the statistics that insurers are using to develop their rates, causes inherent increase. Now, we've seen increases in property insurance since 2017. Are those increases moderating in the last couple of quarters? It appears so, but once again, we don't have enough relevant statistics to be able to see if that is a continuing downturn or if we're going to level off or where we're actually going to wind up as part of this entire event. It is a volatile time. Insurers are aware of that, and being able to work with them as your partner in order to get through these considerations regarding material and labor are essential. One of their main concerns is any delays in the project, of course, cause it longer to be completed, but it also increases insurers' exposure regarding the business interruption portion of the claim, which is often the most expensive element. So insurers are definitely concerned when a 6-month project becomes an 8-month project, and there are 2 additional months of business interruption to be considered as part of the commercial insurance claim. Those are among the many reasons that it's very, very important to keep your insurer involved, keep your insurers up to speed, and be able to address issues, in essence, in real time with them so that they are kept abreast of the situation And when it's time for the settlement to be made and the payments to be made, you have recouped as much as possible beyond your deductible as part of those claims. I think that's it for today. Thanks, everyone. And I'll turn my portion back over to Kurt.
Don, thank you very much. Your experience and expertise, it's greatly appreciated and great information. Finally, I'd like to introduce Pat Harper, Director of Procurement and Compliance here at ATI. Pat is responsible for developing and implementing procurement policies here at ATI. He negotiates national contracts with vendors and standardizes processes for the organization. Pat identifies potential issues with the supply chain and compliance, implementing the necessary steps to mitigate risk. Welcome, Pat.
Thank you, Kurt, and thanks everyone for joining today. It's my pleasure to be here. And thanks to Greg and John for sharing those really scary insights into what's happening out there. So can we do anything about this, right? So we've seen the data, we've seen the cost pressures, we all live it. Can we manage this? Now you notice I'm using the words mitigate and manage through this. I'm not using the word control. If you figured out how to control the cost of lumber, please see me after class. I'd like to talk with you, figure out how you did that. So we're really talking about how can we mitigate. So we got a Be Smart program. So what does that mean? So S, scan the environment, scan the labor and material supply chains, and not just that first layer, right? The nitrile gloves or the Tyvek or the plywood, what's below that. So if you can understand what's happening below that level, all the way down, we call it sometimes dirt to dollars. If you can understand the basic of the supply chain, it can give you insights into what might be coming here in the next couple of months. A couple examples there, early on in the COVID crisis, there was a closure of one of the largest nitrile factories in Malaysia. That closure then rippled through in terms of lead times and cost, but it was many, many months before we saw that. But knowing that that factory is closed, knowing that there are going to be shortages, you can hedge, right, and maybe buy ahead on some nitrile gloves. The Suez Canal blockage obviously was one we all saw that's caused increased costs and lead times for many products. Resins right now, something that we're tracking, right? The resins are in short supply. What does that mean? That's potential for OSB, continued OSB shortages and cost increases. Adhesives, those kinds of things that are going to then drive our costs because of the shortages way down in the supply chain. So try to make it somebody's job to scan the supply chain, both material and labor supply chains, to see what's happening down below. And there's newsletters, there's groups you can join to help give you some insights there. So try to understand what's happening before it's going to hit you, okay? The M is for manage your inventory and owned labor. If you look at inventory strategies over the years, in the 80s and 90s, everyone went to just-in-time inventory management, meaning I just am going to hold enough inventory to do the job I need to do today, and tomorrow new supplies are going to come in, and so I won't have to hold a lot of inventory. And that works fine if your supply chain is very, well controlled and predictable, and you can count on that shipment coming the next day. But of course, we know that during this time that didn't happen, right? The supply chains became very unstable. The other extreme of inventory management is called just in case. So I'm just going to buy an infinite amount of everything just in case I need it someday. On that end of the spectrum, you got cost. Obviously, those are dollars. When you're buying that inventory and put it on your shelf, those are dollars sitting on your shelf that you don't have to use somewhere else. But you also could run into shelf life issues, obsolescence, especially on things like disinfectants. When you're looking at your inventory and you're looking at your purchasing practices, EOQ, economic order quantity, it's very intriguing to say, hey, if I buy 1,000 cases, I really only need 100. But if I buy 1,000 cases of gloves, I get a price break. But you have to understand, how many are you really going to use? You're going to have to store those. There's storage costs. There's shelf life, again, potentially on products like disinfectants. On the other hand, if you run out, you're paying expedite fees, right? You're scrambling, you're going to overpay. So having an inventory strategy that you really understand or it's deliberate is really important to try to control these costs. Again, you have to balance between those two. On the labor side, again, it's a scary story. my message here is try to reduce your attrition, right? That's one thing that we can do. We somewhat control, at least we can influence. Going out and hiring new people is very expensive. If you go to the next slide for a second. Well, I'll hit it later. So reduce attrition. That's right, go back, Maria. I'll dig into that a little bit deeper later. The other thing, if you're using temp labor, subcontractors, maybe consider partnering with a managed service provider or a recruitment process owner, right, to help you manage your labor. So let's go to the next slide. The A is for affiliate yourself with industry groups and vendor programs. Okay, so there's a lot of good industry groups out there, especially if you're a smaller company. You can get purchasing power by joining. These are usually a nominal fee to join some of these groups, and supply chain insights, as we talked about. Right, you can start to see what's going on in lower level supply chains. They'll have newsletters and information. The other thing I'll say is, take advantage of every vendor discount program that's already available to you. It's amazing how many times you have things available to you with your current vendors, and you're maybe not taking advantage of all the discounts and rebates that you can get. Some money on the table there for you. So make sure you're taking advantage of those. On the R, the respond quickly to changes. So again, we talked about it. You heard it earlier from Greg and from John. You got to act quickly on this stuff. You got to be really proactive in communicating with your distributors, with your vendors in both directions. When something's happening, usually the longer you wait, the higher the price you're going to pay to a certain point. Let's go to one slide forward. So this is a phenomenon in supply chain we call the bullwhip effect. And Greg mentioned a little bit about this might be coming. So this is the price of lumber. We've all seen the scary slide, but we also are starting to see the prices coming down. So the bullwhip effect is when I need 10 of something and I'm not sure I'm going to get 10, I order 20. And everyone does that across the whole supply chain. If I think I need one roll of toilet paper, I go buy 10 rolls of toilet paper. That pushes all this demand down into the system. So all the way at the lower levels that we talked about, people are increasing their capacity for resin or for nitrile gloves or for some of the basic supplies. By the time that all flows through over time, I'm still going to order my 10 that I needed. So there's all this pent up excess demand. Now we've got capacity. So if you haven't heard about the bullwhip effect, you probably will start to hear about it. You can see it in even, like I mentioned, toilet paper. If you go to Costco, there's plenty of toilet paper on the shelf and the prices come down. So pay attention to this. This is going to come. It's going to come in different stages for different material, but you'll start to see this. Just go back one. So respond quickly, and then T, to take control. So I do use the word control here. This is about controlling your own spend, your own information internally. Look at your data. Where are you spending money? How many vendors do you have? Where's your top spend? Consolidate your spend where you can, especially on some non-commodity items. Really consolidate that spend, create buying power for yourself. I like to look at having 3 or 4 strategic partners versus 10 or 20 vendors. So look at your strategy around how you're spending your money, where you're spending it. And then on labor side, understand the trade-offs between owned labor. So those are my own employees, temp labor, and subs. What's the mix there? How are you using those 3 labor pools? And you can optimize those based on supply and demand, based on learning curve, based on the market dynamics. So make sure you're paying attention to how you're using labor in your company. Okay, let's go forward. One more. So just again, I wanted to just do a quick deep dive on the employee side since it's such a big deal. I won't go over all the stats. You've seen them all, but it's obviously a lot more expensive to rehire somebody new, train them. If you go forward one more. So if you look down at the bottom there, the top 5 reasons. Now this is this study. You'll see different studies have different their top 5, but career development, work-life balance, compensation is down toward the bottom of this 9%. If you are doing a pay to stay with people, right? You're paying them to stay. That may work in the short term. It may not last very long. It might be that they're going to find something else anyway. So pay attention to your workforce. Look at your attrition rates, your unwanted attrition. Put some effort into making sure you're keeping the people that you have. Okay, that's really the most cost-effective way to manage your labor right now. Okay, go ahead. So I'll leave you with a couple other points here. Counterfeit products, right? You've heard about them, probably seen the news. It's real. They're out there. Counterfeit PPE especially got into the supply chain. Even equipment. So I was working with a original equipment manufacturer. They got a piece of equipment, their own equipment, back for repair from a customer. As they looked at it, though, they noticed the label of the piece of equipment had the company name misspelled. And it was actually a knockoff. And this poor customer paid quite a bit of money for this knockoff. They went to get it repaired, and the company said, hey, we can't repair this. It's not even our piece of equipment. And so that poor customer was out. So really pay attention, even on the equipment side, but certainly around PPE. If the deal's too good to be true, somebody's offering you something, quantities and prices that are pretty, really dig into that, because it may be counterfeit. Along with that is, pay attention to the cost of poor quality. Okay, this is something that's often overlooked. We talked about EOQ. I'm going to buy something. I'm going to get a really good deal because I'm buying this. I'm going to buy this from a new vendor. I'm going to save a few dollars here and there. But the cost of poor quality can really come back and get you. Let's say I'm buying, masks for my crew, and I got a really good deal on them, but the straps are breaking, 2 or 3 times as fast as the ones that cost a little bit more. Now my crew is using 2 or 3 times as many masks as they would have been, with a good mask. So now the cost is not there, right? The cost savings goes away. So I like to say, remember, when you buy good quality products or services, right, you only cry once. If you think about that, you only cry when you pay the price up front. You don't cry over and over again when you're dealing with the poor quality of the parts and services. Right, go forward one more. So that's some of the practices that we're using, and hopefully it'll help you mitigate and not control, but mitigate and manage some of these cost increases that we're seeing. So back to you, Kurt.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, and thank you, Greg and John, for your expertise and sharing with us on this presentation. Been very, very informative and helpful. Now, let's turn it over to some Q&A, and we're going to address as many questions as we can during the time we have remaining. We have a handful of great questions that have populated. I'm going to do a little bit of a housekeeping here. We were asked if this session is being recorded. Yes, this session has been recorded, and our team will send that out in the next couple of days. Greg, we have a handful of questions in here for you. I want to address with the group. Have you backed out lumber and looked at the costs of your basket of goods when lumber is removed from the overall price?
Thanks, Kurt. And that is a great question, and something we did think about, and actually had our data statistician do that for me and pull that out. So if you look at the basket of goods that we have that includes material and labor, combines both material and labor together, it's gone up about 20% over the last year. And if you remove the lumber portion, it's about half that, just around 11%. So and I think with it is just, I think it's about 21%. So it's about half of what it would be. Look at the material only. So take out labor, just look at material only on that same basket of goods. We see over a 30% increase with lumber. And then without lumber, it's just over 7%. So lumber has a big play in that part of it as well. And another interesting note to think about is on the claims side of the world, property claims, lumber only runs about 3 to 5% of the total spend of dollar value. And so lumber is not a high use item as far as claims go, but the increase had a big impact on the industry. But then also, if you look at a reconstruction cost from the ground up, complete rebuild, lumber is going to be in that 15 to 25% range of the total cost. So a complete loss where there's a fire that burns to the ground, it's a lot larger portion of that cost than just your normal day-to-day claims that may come through.
Thanks, Greg. We have a follow-up for you as well. Under specialized mitigation labor, does this include the added labor hours we're seeing for COVID supervision or additional cleaning and PPE equipment?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. The chart I showed you was just the increase of the hourly labor itself. didn't go and take into account any increases that you may see in additional labor hours that are needed, to maybe take care of COVID testing or the fact of working in PPE, that kind of thing. Or it also did not take into account any additional costs for PPE. You think about PPE before COVID, you wouldn't see a plumber come into a house wearing gloves and, a mask and that kind of thing, where with COVID, that became more common, where they're going to come into your home, they wear PPE, wear the mask to make people feel safer about transmission of COVID and things like that. So it did not take into account additional usage of PPE or additional hours may be needed as well. It was just simply the increase in the hourly labor cost of those labor trades.
Thanks, Greg. John, we have one in here for you. Where do I find construction cost data for my area?
But as I said, you can do it. It's as easy as a Google search of construction costing and the name of your city. You can go to several of the different services or companies that are available that actually do that kind of thing. Once again, it's an online search for who it is that you would be most comfortable using. It could be everyone from CoreLogic to Ryder Levitt Bucknell to different firms that do nothing but construction cost analysis that are known within the industry. And sounds like something that might be a good follow-up for being able to provide some resources to you. So happy to do that.
Yeah, and so as well, this is Greg. Exactware does publish construction pricing trend information on our website. We have some of it there. Just go to exactware.com under resources, pricing resources. There's some publications we have there on trends and costs. And then also if you're a customer, and you'll have access to exact analysis for service providers and has trend reports in there as well.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, John. Pat, this one goes to you. How can I establish how much inventory I should carry for various items?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So there are methodologies, pretty formal methodologies, equations for safety stock and how much you hold, but there's also it's the science, and then there's the art of understanding your consumption, understanding, we're coming into fire season, we're coming into polar vortex season. So you look at your lead times, you look at the supply, right? You look at your demand, and there's the formal math stuff. But then there's also talk to people in your organization that have been through it, understand what's coming. The demand side is often the hardest part of it. It used to be the most difficult part. Now the supply side has become difficult with all the stuff we've talked about. But use formal, methodologies, but then also use your team that knows what's going on. Talk to your vendors, talk to your customers, see what's coming. So both a science and an art to it.
Thanks, Pat. Greg, you've got a large influx of questions coming in. You've got some great dialogue coming in. In your experience, has Xactimate been able to keep up with the increases we've seen in the last 12 months?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think we've done a very good job of keeping up with most things. In these kind of environments, it is difficult because our cadence is a 1 month publication. So we published the first part of the month, and in some cases, the price was moving so rapidly that even during the month, you would see some increases. And during those times, we tried to stay towards the higher end of the data we were getting, try to help account for some of that situation where the price may increase during the month. I think we've done a good job, but one of the great things about Xactimate is that the detail's all there. It's all open for inspection. So a user can easily crack open an estimate, see what the price is. I think some of the issue has been that, the claim may happen in June or May. So the estimate's written with the May price list, and the work starts to happen in July or June or July, and prices have changed since then. So I think the need to maybe look at repricing that estimate to the current price list is a lot greater need now than maybe it has been in the past when prices weren't moving as fast. I think that's one of the things that the industry is working through and trying to understand, where in the past it wasn't as big of a deal because from one month to the next, there wasn't that big of a difference. But I think Exact overall has done a good job. And again, the great thing is that the price is there. You can pull up the estimate, look into the component list and see what it says for a price of 1/2 inch OSB. It tells you what the price is, and you just can adjust that if needed as well.
Thanks, Greg. Both John and Pat, we have a question I think that will resonate with both of you. And how do we differentiate between temporary labor and subcontractors?
It's a really good question, and one that we look at quite a bit. So in general, you can start with, how often are you getting invoiced? So if you're getting labor from somebody, it's pure labor, they're going to want to invoice you, could be weekly, right? Because they're paying the payroll. Where subcontractor, you've got a statement of work to do a specific job. That invoice is probably going to be a 30-day type of invoicing. So one way to look at it is, what are you getting from the sub? If it's truly a deliverable, that's a sub. If a sub has got excess labor and they're wanting to, provide you some temp labor, you need to understand how are you going to invoice for that. If it's really a quick invoice because you're paying that's more of a temp labor situation. There is gray area in between there you have to pay attention to.
Thanks, Pat.
And then, Kurt, from my perspective, it's really, again, the document, because if you're in essence doing labor sharing, there could be different rates that would apply. There could be, different cost codes that apply. So just be aware that you're going to have to, justify how the costs are incurred for the kind of trade-off there.
Thank you. Greg, we've got another question for you. With regards to PPE added costs, I have clients responding that it should be included in the overhead and profit. Would you agree with this, or how does Xactimate handle this?
Great question. And it is additional overhead cost, or could be, since Xactware doesn't set the overhead percentage being used. That's up to the parties involved to determine. But if they're holding you to a certain overhead percentage that hasn't changed since before the issue with PPE, and I think maybe an argument is saying, well, you allowed this overhead percentage before, and now this additional cost is there that I didn't have before, so I need to charge for that PPE separate. We have seen an increase in the use of PPE in the claims coming through our system. So we have seen people start to charge for that separate. And so, yeah, but without knowing what percentage was used, maybe part of the negotiation is that instead of getting X%, I'm going to do a little higher percent because of the additional overhead costs I have. And if that's not going about, then it may be appropriate to add them separate in the estimate.
Thanks, Greg. John, do you expect material and labor costs to decline in the near future back to pre-COVID levels?
Probably not. No, that's a really foggy crystal ball question, let's say. But as it stands right now, we're dealing with life as it comes to us every day. It's like, we thought we were getting ahead as far as the COVID, the pandemic was coming to us, but now we've got, variant viruses to deal with that are affecting how we're even looking at whether we're wearing masks when we go in stores or not. It's a difficult call, and based on what we know so far, we're really doing the best I can. I'm sorry I don't have a more definitive answer than that, but if nothing changes, it looks like we could be in this environment for a while.
And
just
if I may
Kurt,
add, oh, go ahead, Pat.
I was just going to, said, we talked about a little bit this bullwhip effect. If we were in some sort of any normal times, you should see some relief on as the demand, that's just the capabilities of factories catch up to the demand. So you should start to see some, but as John pointed out, I'm sure Greg will too, it's like you can't predict what's going to happen, obviously, right? You can't predict on the demand side, you can't predict what's going to happen. But theoretically, as this capacity gets put in place, we should start to see some relief, but people are not going to go back to pre-COVID pricing. I don't think that's ever going to happen.
Yeah, I appreciate that,
Well,
Pat and
and
John.
yeah, go ahead.
And I agree with what's being said that, if the pressures don't change, the situation doesn't change, then it's very unlikely. And even in hurricane events that come through, where you may see a demand in, a short situation where there's a higher demand for workers and that kind of thing, where you see prices go up. A lot of times that will become the new norm, as that market will kind of accept that new price. People are used to charging it. Unless something happens that starts to push people downward, it may just stay there as the new norm. And it takes a lot more pressure on the downward side than the upward side. I mean, look at gas stations in general. When you go buy gas, it goes up very quick. And if the cost of a barrel of oil comes down, it's a lot slower to go back downward, because there's got to be some additional heavier pressure where somebody decides I'm going to start charging less, or the demand decreases. And so the pressure to go down is there's got to be a lot more pressure than for upward movement, if that makes sense.
Yeah, an example of that would be, what's happening at lumber mills right now. As Greg and Pat talked about before, they had closed because of COVID. Well, as it stands right now, we're getting reports that they've got plenty of logs to saw and are trying to ramp back up, which is helping moderate the price some. But there are other things that are part of that supply chain that could be adversely affected, and we're right back where we were. It's like the resin costs for plywood. Do we have enough resin? Are we in a situation where we have to deal with variant viruses, and the workers at the sawmills are once again not able to come to work? We're all doing the best we can.
Yeah,
it's a lot easier to gain weight than to lose weight.
Yeah, same concept. And lumber, one of the biggest players for lumber is new construction. That is a big purchaser of lumber. So if the new construction market starts to cool off or changes, that could have an impact on lumber as well, because that's the biggest consumer generally, is that new construction market, which is tied to the economy. If people have confidence, interest rates are low, they have access to money, wages are good to be able to pay those prices. So new construction is a good identifier, especially for lumber. So watch what's going on in the new construction industry.
Thanks. Looks like we have time for one more question. Greg, over time, we've seen very little increase in cabinet costs in Xactimate, and we're getting pushback from carriers on the monthly increase of our costs associated with cabinets. Can you give some advice on how an estimator should be communicating with Xactimate, or how they can go addressing those price increases with their customers, carriers, and adjusters?
Yeah, so it's a great question. It was multifaceted. As far as getting information to Xactware, we have an email set up for pricing questions or feedback. It's pricing@xactware.com. That comes directly to the pricing group. Also, if you dial any of our 800 numbers, there's an option there in the automated phone system to exchange pricing information. That will ring my group directly to give feedback that way. And then again, reiterate that the great thing about Xactimate is the data is all open there for inspection. So you can go up and look at what the cost for the material allotment is for cabinets. Cabinet is a very unique one where we have lots of different options and qualities and grades there. So it really can vary. And one thing to keep in mind in a situation in a market where, there's a high demand and things are going up quickly, that's when you'll see a lot more volatile pricing as well. So, if we were to do a survey from 5 different cabinet shops in the same market, in this type of market, we see a lot bigger variance in their different prices they would quote us than a market that's not as not in this type of situation. So keeping that in mind as well. And one other point to make along those lines is smaller jobs, especially, think about if I'm a drywall sub and I've got a lot of jobs that are larger, new construction, big remodel jobs they want me to do, where I can put my crew there for weeks at a time. It's easy for me to manage. They stay busy all day, every day. And if somebody wants me to do a little project that takes 1 or 2 days, I got to come back to it. They tend to start to charge higher for those smaller projects where minimums tend to increase, because for them to go do that work, it's more of a headache, and they have plenty of large jobs to work on. So they'll see bigger variances in small projects as well. Well, they'll quote a lot higher price sometimes because they have other work, and you'll see even a bigger variance in small jobs from subs in that type of situation, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you so much to our panelists. It looks like we're out of time. Should you be interested in learning more about the topics discussed, please feel free to reach out to our panelists directly. I will leave their information up for a minute so that you can take a quick screenshot. We will also be sending out a recording of this webinar so you can rewatch it or share it with members of your team. Thank you again for joining us. Have a wonderful day. And again, thank you to our panelists for spending the time to present your expertise on the subject. It was very informative.